So, after 92 hours, I have completed Starfield's main story, the 4 faction quest lines, and a bunch of other miscellaneous stuff. I also tried my hand at shipbuilding, and I at least attempted to learn a little bit about outpost building. Todd Howard and Bethesda said I could explore new planets and solar systems, basically having complete freedom to do whatever I wanted. So, I visited a bunch of planets, I surveyed creatures and plants, I checked out outposts, mines, and unique geographical locations. I tried my best to do as much as possible in this playthrough, and I've made quite a few videos on the channel already about this game before and after its release, and in the early days of playing this game, I really did enjoy it, even with it not being that true next-gen game that I hoped for. I kept playing, and I looked past some of the disappointing things. However, over the past couple of weeks, as I put the finishing touches on the main narrative stuff, I found myself losing interest in the game, and this happening at a rapid pace, and my opinion of the game has soured even more. I rated the game a 7.5 out of 10, and today I'm changing that to a 7. I know, it's hardly moving the needle, but I'll explain why in this video. From the content perspective, it's a 7 out of 10. From a performance perspective, it's a 6 out of 10. So in today's video, I want to explain why I went from enjoying Starfield to why I am extremely disappointed now. So there's a few reasons as to why I became more and more disappointed with this game. I really got upset with the constant performance issues that just never seemed to have gotten better over time. I never once sat down and had a play session that did not include 1 or 2 crashes. The drop in frame rate was almost a constant thing. It didn't matter if I was walking around a city or if I was just casually walking across the tundra on a new planet. And God forbid if you got into intense combat, the game can't handle you fighting a group of enemies either. And also, anytime you load the game, again, it's like a fast traveling simulator, so you're in loading screens all the time. I think actually the game crashed more in loading screens than in any other instance. And it's funny because here's the kicker when it comes to the performance of the game and Bethesda's updates. So, I finished up the final faction quest line on November 7th. The following day, on November 8th, we finally got an update that addressed NVIDIA DLSS support, performance and stability improvements, and fixes to gameplay and quests. I'm so glad it only took 2 months to get any sort of patch or update, but it also comes out after I completed the main parts of the game. I'm really getting tired of games that take forever to fix glaring issues. I had a similar problem with Jedi Survivor earlier this year. I beat the game a few months after launch and there were still major bugs and performance issues that were not fixed. I could not even complete the game technically. I had a bug that prevented me from defeating all the bounty hunters in regards to that side quest. And yes, it technically was a side thing, but still frustrating that I could not do that. It's one thing to have to wait a while to get actual DLC content like brand new stuff, but how come Bethesda did not make it a priority to fix these things within a few weeks, especially when it comes to frame rate drops and the game crashing multiple times in a playthrough? When it comes to open world RPGs, I can look past issues with performance and gameplay if the story is actually good. If the game is fun and the narrative is at least somewhat interesting, then I could usually power through the things that frustrate me. Technically, I was able to do this in Starfield, but the game falls into the same trap that every single open world game gets stuck in. What is that trap? Implementing bland and repetitive missions and activities. Starfield did have an interesting story, however the way they tell it gets old pretty fast. You start off as a miner who finds a strange artifact that creates weird gravitational effects, and when you touch it, you experience a vision that propels you through time and space. It looks cool. You bring the artifact to the Constellation, which is a group of space explorers trying to investigate these artifacts. Why? Because the goal of the Constellation is to explore space and discover the unknown. Sounds exciting, right? Well, it gets old pretty fast when you spend a large chunk of time looking for these artifacts specifically, and then you experience more of these visions. It's a repetitive process. Go here, find the artifact, and when you grab it, have another vision. Yes, you might have to fight some enemies in the mine from time to time, but it's just the same old boring adventure. Then things do get a little bit more interesting when you start to investigate anomalies that lead you to strange temples. You go to these temples, you go inside them, and in order to activate them, you have to fly around in the air towards these little like energy ball things, and you do this like 7 or 8 times, and then you get to enter this portal-like thing, and you hover there and you gain a power. And there's quite a few powers to find. I technically still have to find some of them, and the ones that I've found so far, they're okay. They really aren't that strong, or there's really no way to upgrade them or do anything really exciting. You know, some things include gravity push, loss of gravity, so everyone's floating up in the air, and one of the powers I do like allows you to summon another version of yourself to fight alongside you. This all sounds decent, right? Well, like I said, the powers are subpar, and it's just another rinse and repeat method to acquire them. Go to temples that all look the same, fly around and run into these energy ball things, and then go into the ring portal thing to acquire a new power. Nothing changes. It's the same process every single time. Things get interesting then again in the second half of the campaign when you begin to be harassed by entities called the Starborn. You learn the Starborn are just people from different universes. Yes, Starfield's main story includes a multiverse. Rather than come in contact with other kinds of alien life forms on the other side of the galaxy that maybe control things and are powerful and dangerous, Starfield would rather turn this into a Marvel movie. And of course, it then features the theme of good versus evil, because there's a good Starborn person and a bad Starborn person to deal with. You could choose to help either of them, or you could keep the artifacts for yourself. Once the artifacts are gathered, you build something called the Armillary, which basically attaches to your grav drive and transports you to a place called Unity. There you reflect on the choices you made throughout the game, choices that affect different outcomes in the galaxy. If you enter the Unity, then you are sent to a new universe, and it's basically New Game Plus. You lose all of your possessions and your relationships that you made throughout the playthrough, and that new universe is shaped based on the decisions you made in the first one you were in. When I explain the story, some of it does sound interesting, and I mean, my focus was in there, like I wanted to see what was going to happen, but honestly, the journey to get to and through these situations is just lame. The gameplay is just as average as it is when you're doing side quests. I think the faction quest lines did a better job of providing unique stories and offering better ways to roleplay. The UC Vanguard, you become a soldier and you work towards stopping an army of dangerous creatures that can destroy civilizations. The Freestar Rangers faction allows you to become a space cowboy, essentially, like a sheriff, where you look after farmers and other citizens. The Crimson Fleet was another solid experience. This quest throws you in the middle of an ongoing conflict between the Crimson Fleet pirates and the UC System Defense Fleet. The UC wants you to go undercover and help bring the pirates to justice, but then the Crimson Fleet is looking for money, a lot of it. So it's basically like playing two faction quests in the one, and eventually you have to pick a side. But again, great role-playing elements. Being an undercover agent or choosing to be a space pirate. The Ryujin questline had the most potential, but it ended up being one of the lamest in my opinion. This is the Starfield version of the Thieves Guild, essentially, in Skyrim. You are supposed to sneak around and steal stuff, plant information, and go behind people's backs. The storyline itself was actually very interesting, but the actual gameplay throughout the missions is lackluster and very frustrating. The first few stealth missions are poorly designed. You don't even have to sneak around. You just go into an office and you shut the door or close the blinds and you do whatever you have to do. You access the computer, you steal something, you plant information on a desk, and it's over in like 5 minutes. And then near the end of the questline, you get a few legit stealth missions, and these missions are designed properly, but the stealth system is just not great in this game at all. Your companion doesn't even try to sneak around with you, and yeah, I know you can leave your companion behind, but in my opinion, the AI should be better. And yes, I could have maxed out my stealth skills, but that is just not my playthrough style. And I'd argue that the stealth system as a whole needs to have a better design, because it's virtually impossible to do anything. Like you could barely move. And I understand it's one thing to crouch and move slowly, but like the fact that your character, in order to not get spotted or noticed, you have to literally move your character a centimeter like per second is ridiculous. Nobody wants to play like that. Come on. Bethesda did do a good job when it came to the narrative in this game. The main story was interesting. The faction quests were all good in their own ways. There's even some cool side missions out there that surprised me. And I don't deny the effort Bethesda put in this game, but the game is just too big and bloated for its own good. Yes, it's fantastic that there's thousands upon thousands of lines of dialogue, so you never hear repetitive stuff, and I will give them credit for that, but there's really just no reason to have 1,000 planets in this game. The game should have started off with like one solar system and a handful of planets. And I'm going to bring up a point that I've made many times in other videos when talking about Starfield. Why not make this game a live service game in terms of adding more planets and solar systems over time? What if like every 6 months or so we got a DLC content drop that featured some new story stuff, new quests, some new characters, missions, weapons, ships, whatever. And I don't really care how they schedule it. It could be 6 months, 9 months, 3 months, whatever. Like whatever works for the developers. But that's not the point. The point here is that, you know, if this game is going to get like a 5-year lifespan where they really want to focus on it while they're working on, you know, the next, you know, Elder Scrolls game or whatever they have planned next, then why don't we just work towards building a galaxy over time? Fallout and Skyrim each had a few major DLC drops with new quests and whatnot that were really good. And sometimes I wonder why I'm this shocked and disappointed, because I had a bad feeling something was up last year and even this past summer. The promotion for this game, in my opinion, was not great. The game was announced back in 2018, and we never really saw anything of substance until last year when they showed us that like 10 or 12 minutes of highly scrutinized gameplay. It then got delayed, and then they were radio silent again. Sure, they might have talked a few times here and there a little bit about the game, but nothing was ever shown off again until this past summer. Yes, the 40-minute presentation was cool, it was informative, and it did get me hyped. But I did notice things that were not really shown off or talked about much. We learned very little about the story, which makes sense because it was lackluster and repetitive at times. We did not see much on melee combat, and that makes sense because there's hardly any melee weapons, and the melee combat, in my opinion, is extremely lame. They teased the powers, but they didn't show much because the powers are subpar. The one thing that was consistent was Todd Howard continuously saying how great this game was because it's big and you could explore everything and do whatever you wanted. And those claims are not totally true. Yes, you could go about things your own way or whenever you want, but this is a half-assed space game. Exploring just involves continuously scanning creatures and plants and fast traveling from point A to B to C, then D, then E, then F, then to G. In 92 hours, I fast traveled through the entire alphabet probably thousands of times. And the loading screens aren't quick, and like I said earlier, I can't even tell you how many times the game crashed for me during these load times. And speaking of Todd Howard, a former Bethesda veteran developer named Bruce Naismith did an interview on MinMax's YouTube channel not too long ago, and he reminisced about his time with the company and, you know, when he began work on Daggerfall back in the day, and he eventually was promoted to lead designer on Skyrim. He did a little bit of work on Starfield too before he left the company to pursue a different career. To quickly summarize the interview, Naismith said every single decision on Bethesda RPGs ran through Todd Howard. He apparently gets the final say on everything. And Naismith claims that Todd would hate to hear him say this because he doesn't believe it's true. And look, I like Todd Howard, and I'm not going to sit here and stir the pot and say it's time for Todd Howard to leave the company or anything like that, but if this is true, and looking at how disappointing Starfield and even Fallout 76 have been, it makes you wonder if the creative process at Bethesda needs to change a bit. Again, I'm not saying Todd Howard has to go, but maybe there needs to be some tweaks made for future projects, because ultimately, you can't keep making the same game every time. You can't make every Bethesda game in the future look and feel like Skyrim and Fallout. You have to make something new, you have to get with the times. And that's the last thing I'll say here as I wrap up. The most disappointing thing about this game is that it is not a next-gen game. Starfield does nothing to take gaming to the next level. It's not even a modern-day game. The game looks and runs like a game from 10 years ago. From the constant frame rate drops, the horrific textures, not having any maps, and constant fast traveling, it just looks out of date. If a game that offers hundreds of hours of content wants to keep players around for that long, then something's got to give. If the gameplay is average, then the story better be amazing. If the story is lackluster, then the gameplay better be fun and exciting. But when it comes to Starfield, the whole game is subpar. I want to hear your thoughts on Starfield. Did you enjoy it, or are your opinions similar to mine? Thanks for checking out the video. Feel free to check out the rest of the videos on the channel and consider subscribing. You could also find my content on podcasting platforms. Just Google Analyze This Podcast. You could also find me on X and TikTok, X at AnalyzeThis_YT, and TikTok at AnalyzeThis54_YT. Thanks again, and take care.